All right, here we go. I am back to talk about one of the reasons that I really like KJF, and that's the Navy warfare just in general. One part I really found it interesting early on when I started seeing people using destroyer blocks and how you can manipulate the navies and get around things with those. Just the fact that pieces can move 2 units, but yet you also got these fighters and bombers that can go 4 and 6. To me, it just makes a much more fascinating battle than the land battle. Don't get me wrong, I love my land battles, but the Navy's it's much more interesting. I remember the first time my opponent had someone in C Zone 52, and I didn't even realize they could hit West USA, and I lost West USA because I didn't protect it. But those are the old days. So just the maneuverability of the pieces and such makes it a much more strategic thinking game in my mind. But the other part I really like is talking about the order of losses of the units because it's very unique. When you've got subs and destroyers that have unique rules to them, fighters that can't hit subs without a destroyer and so forth, or when you got carriers being sunk in fighters that can't land if they weren't next to a friendly zone, it just makes the unique individual battle even more interesting. And so I had alluded to in my last video that this just would not be a smart move for them to come to C Zone 32 because of the 2 subs, cruiser, 2 fighters versus a battleship carrier and 2 fighters. And so I want to take a look at some of the calculators as they come into play here and what this all means. So, yep, this is the right one. So when we look at it, this is the battle written out on this calculator. And just real quick showing of this calculator. Some people use different calculators. This is one I used originally. I used this a lot. It has its weaknesses. I've actually switched over to the Skelly calculator, which you'll see in some of my other videos. I like the AAA calculator, except for I just don't like taking the time to get into the game to get to it. But this one really, I like how this shows your losses and your expected results of the battle, and especially for what I want to show you here. So I took this battle, and uh, my initial bit was to make the order of losses kind of the ways that you would expect. So the defender's going to, the attacker's going to take their subs, which roll at 2s out first, and then their fighters, which roll at 3, cruisers and fighters, which roll at 3s out next. And generally the fighters are more valuable, even though technically they're 10 versus 12 IPCs. And for the defense, they're going to take they're going to take the carrier first, then the fighter, and then the battleship. Uh, Being again, the carrier is a 2 defender, fighter is a 4 defender, battleship's a 4 defender, 4 dice roll defender. So that gives you the strongest defense. And so when I roll that, it says, okay, the attackers have a 47% chance of living, and the defense has a 65% chance of living. But this doesn't tell the whole story. So if you're not familiar with this one, as it says here, the average results are highlighted in yellow and the median results are written in red. And I'm not going to go into all the statistics of it all, but just know that the yellow and red is kind of the average, middle of the ground results, if you will. So I'm not so much interested in the attack results, but I'm really interested in the defensive results here. So in this particular case, this is showing that there's a 35% chance no units, 9.61 fighter lives, and 6% chance 2 fighters live. Now remember, in this example, we're talking about a C zone that is a non-friendly C zone for them. So this is going to be something that if the fighter lives, they're going to die. They're just going to crash. They can't land on a carrier. So in this particular case, these fighter losses are actually full losses. So if we add another 15.5%, we got a 50% chance that they're going to have no units, which isn't what this looks like. If I look at this even a little bit closer, as the Allies, we're risking a 44 IPCs of UK units. If the only thing that lives is the battleship, then they've lost 34 IPCs in those carrier and fighters. And in this UK strategy of mine, where I'm looking to trade UK for Japan, 34 for 44, I call that a win. So anything where the carrier dies, in this case, is considered a win. So if we really look at these results, all of these, except for that 7.5% results, the carrier dies. So I look at this, this is actually a 92.5% success rate for the attacker, which isn't what this shows. So that's why I like looking at this particular calculator for this battle. But most people you're going to run into are going to know you don't put the carrier before fighter when you're in non-friendly sea zone. So here I'm going to switch it up, and here now my defensive profiler has that fighter going before the carrier, so that the carrier doesn't get lost with the fighter's nowhere to land. And again, basically we're looking at where the carrier survives being a win for the defense. So now that's 13 plus the 12 is 25, 32% chance. So from that 7.5% chance of a success for defense to 32% chance of success for defense, in my opinion, in this battle. So that makes a big difference taking the fighters before carriers. I will say, as far as it goes, that's still a win for the UK, and the reason I'd still take that battle. Because even within this, a lot of these are still just the battleship surviving in there, and even still, we still have a 42.7, 45, 46% chance all of his units die, which is still 50-50 in that sense that everything dies. But again, you see there's these points where there's just the fighters living. So what does that mean? That means that the offense had a sub just survive and take out the boats from underneath. So there's a small chance that sub surviving is actually more important. So what if, as the attacker, instead of taking the subs before the cruisers and fighter, what if we take the subs even after the fighter? So we're taking this 6 IPC unit that attacks at 2 and defends at 1 after my 10 IPC, 4 defense, 3 attack fighter. Kind of crazy, right? Well, now we look at it, and now there's a 54% chance that the attacker survived, meaning there is a 54% chance that one of my subs survived. And if my sub survived, that means his entire navy was wiped out. So even though there's a 65% chance the defense lives, that is with fighters living. So now I've actually increased it to a 53% chance of a complete wipeout, 54% chance of a complete wipeout of his fleet. And again, of the carrier making it is now, what is that, 16, 22 some percent versus a 30% before. So it's actually advantageous for the attacker to lose his cruisers and fighters before his subs in this case. And this is very interesting to me. This is a small scale battle, but there's other times that similar things can come up. So I posted this in the Discord a while back, and people who were in this discussion already know what this says and what comes of this. But basically, there's this attack I had in a game where I could attack with 17 subs, 4 fighters, and 3 bombers. And the setup to this was he had a lot of, I couldn't get any surface ships because he had a lot of fighters and whatnot that could knock him out. So I had to build subs because that's all I had safe for the time. Defending, he had 5 subs, 4 destroyers, 4 carriers, 8 fighters, and 3 battleships. So I threw out there, do you attack? And if you're on defense, what do you set the defensive profile to? And just to make the battle a little bit more juicy, there were 2 transports that the defenders were defending as well. So again, we're talking about Sea Zone 12, so I'm going to just kind of scroll over here. So this is an important piece, is this is out in the middle of the Atlantic. So again, we have that scenario where fighters you can't land are going to die. If the carriers are gone, then the fighters are going to automatically die there. So I know this is a lot of calculator looking at and whatnot, but I think this is just interesting data. So here is my battle. So here I put it in just trust me, I put all the units in correctly. And I tried to put the order of loss in here kind of close together. So in this case, the attackers, again, if they did sub fighters bombers, and the defenders did the sub destroyer carrier fighter battleship order of loss, being the lowest attackers first and the lowest defenders first and the big hitters last. So again, the quick look at this is, the defense survives 97% of the time, and attackers survive 23% of the time. So right off the bat, you're just kind of like, oh, this is not look good for the attackers to do. And when I come down and I take a little bit closer look at it, so first off, one of the things we value is how much IPC is lost. So the attackers are throwing 178 IPC of units into it. So we come down here, and here's our yellows, and lo and behold, here again we got fighters surviving with no carrier, and so 5 fighters would be actually killed as well, so that'd be 192 IPC. So here we're talking about in general, not going through all the little details, but you can see kind of in general, this is going to be in that median result or middle result, a win for the attackers, even though this didn't spell win. So I switched it up, gave the defense a switch where they put the fighters before carriers like they're supposed to, and immediately you'll start seeing that the results start to change. And in this scenario, again, the median's actually up here. So now the median result is going to be 126 IPC loss, and that's going to be accurate. That's the rest of those pieces are still going to be there as compared to my 178. You get down into some of these guys, and here's 4 fighters dying, going to 188, 5 fighters dying, 198. So there's still some pretty advantageous results here for the attacker, but there's a higher risk of it not being, because they did the order of loss more correct. But the other thing that if you look at, and you look closer at some of the different spots, and I mean there's a lot of just these fighters living throughout the results that are going to add up to more and more advantageous battles for the attacker. So in this case, it's still a win for the attackers. So now we switch over, and just like before, because we saw those cases where fighters were living, it was a good thing. So I did the attacker order of loss and moved those subs to the back like we did in that last one, because it made a better result. So I move it so the subs are going to survive. And so now there's a 62% chance the attacker lives, 100% chance the defender wins. So this is telling me right off the bat, there's a 2/3 chance that the sub survives, and they're going to have airplanes living. And remember, if a sub survives versus airplanes, then the transports are going to die. If airplanes of the attacker survive and all the defender has left is subs, the transports get killed as well. So sure enough, we come and look at here, and fighter surviving, fighter surviving, fighter surviving, fighter surviving. This here is 62% of the result is right there, and that's an entire wipe of the defending Navy. So again, remember, if you didn't change your order of losses and you just saw this, you bailed out of this battle. But here, even with them taking fighters before carriers, if you take those subs last, all of a sudden, this is a very profitable battle for the attackers. But wait, what if we take this a step further, and the defender realizes that, hey, they got a lot of subs attacking. I need to care for my destroyers even a little bit more and move the destroyers to after the carriers. So now all those fighters that are surviving are actually going to stay in the battle because the destroyers are there. And look at the difference. From that 62% survival rate of the attackers, we're now down to 9.4% survival rate of the attackers. And just to cut to the chase, what if we moved the destroyer to after the battleship? We actually reduced the rate even more. We went down another 3% chance. So this is a scenario where actually taking the destroyer after the battleship, after the great big battleships, is more advantageous than taking them before the battleships. Now, I will say that's a 3% chance difference. And if that's a difference between, having 2 battleships and a destroyer versus 3 battleships survive, well, it may still be better to keep that destroyer in front of the battleships to have more of the battleships survive. But the point being, if you wanted to talk pure statistic and the subs surviving, that would be the case. Now, in this scenario now, where we're taking our subs last on offense, but they're now got the best scenario for the destroyer, is it advantageous for the attacker to attack? So remember, we're putting 178 IPC out there. And we come into this area and we start looking, and again, here's 4 fighters that are going to go down, so that's at 166. Here, 2 of the fighters survive, so not so much. 5 of the fighters die, 186. Fighters survive, 118. Or carriers survive, 118. So this is still a very wishy-washy battle, and you could sit here and go back and add up. But again, you have to sit here and look and say, okay, well, 7 fighters surviving 4 destroyers, that's actually going to be 226 IVC. So, I mean, you really got to go in and kind of scrunch the data and really look at these numbers closely to determine whether it would be good or bad. In this particular case, I actually think it's slightly, it's not as good of a deal for the attacker, and not as bad as this makes it look, because we're still going to get a pretty good trade out of this, but we're not going to get to the transports, and that was kind of the big deal. Was, could we get to the transports and kill those transports? That's really not going to happen. We can say that pretty confidently. Are we going to get our trade value out of it? Maybe, maybe not. But I've got one more thing for you to think about. In the Axis and Allies online game here, you roll, and the defender takes their losses first. So I am the live person, the attacker. I can see what the defender takes. And if you look at this and assume, this is 5 or 6 hits, this here should be 3 or 4 hits. So, 8, 9, 10 hits happening in there. Well, we're going to get through those subs. And we're going to see, does it start taking fighters next? Or does the destroyer start going next? Or the carriers start? So I'm going to be able to see what his defense profile is in that particular case. And so if I notice the destroyers aren't going, that I know he's got this really good setup, but the destroyer's going later, well, then the defenders take their shots, and I get to choose my order of loss. So now all of a sudden I can turn around and say, well, those subs aren't going to be so great. So what if I go back to taking the subs first? All of a sudden, that chance of one of my attackers surviving went up to 21%, but now it's with the airplanes living. And the airplanes living with him having more chances of where it's just subs living. And again, I would be killing those transports, which was really my main target. But even still, all of a sudden too, we look at the median and all the average results, and that IPC trade value has gone up as well. So this is one of those unique things where order of loss of the attacker matters, and the attacker can decide the order of loss as the battle goes, where the defense does not have that advantage in Axis and Allies Online. They cannot adapt to how they take their losses. Which, don't get me wrong, I love how the Axis and Allies Online is set up. It just adds a unique twist to the game. And again, another reason why I like my KJF strategies. So as you can see, order of loss can be very important when it comes to Navy battles, and I highly suggest, especially when you get to that major battle, and especially if you have a battle where there's lots of subs and not many destroyers or lots of airplanes, because that's another thing you got to watch out for is, you know, Japan has 10 airplanes going around and you got a carrier and battleship but then 20 subs. Well, guess what? Those airplanes can kill the surface fleet and the transports, even if your subs still survive. So, unique things you got to watch out for in the Navy battle. So, in any case, I just thought that was an interesting battle scenario where, it actually is advantageous to not take battleships last. And just some scenarios for you to think about, and always make sure you're considering what your defensive profile is, what your opponent's defensive profile is, and if you're using these battle calculators, whether it's this one or Skelly or AAA, make sure you're making the order of loss the way that you actually expect it to be, because you can see it can swing those percentages a whole lot from one side to the other. All right, have a good evening, and I look forward to the next time.